Hi, my name is Jeff Hennessy with Hennessy Insurance here in Douglas, Georgia, and today we're here with George McCranie. We're going to try to ask him a couple of questions on your rights as far as coming up on a roadblock and some other questions that my insureds always ask. You got a second for these questions?
Sure, go ahead.
A lot of times I'm asked this by my insureds, if they're driving down the road and come up on a roadblock, legally do they have to go through the roadblock?
Nope, they're not actually required to go through the roadblock. In Georgia, there's no statute that requires a person to actually enter into and proceed to a roadblock once you see it. You're completely allowed to turn prior to entering that roadblock. If you have a regular, say a residential area or a home, you can turn into the driveway of the home, or you can turn onto any other street or highway as long as you do it legally. That means you have to slow down, use your blinker, and make a standard turn that doesn't violate any of the traffic laws, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with turning before that roadblock. Now, a lot of times, the law enforcement will leave the roadblock and race after you and pull you over and tell you that they stopped you because you avoided the roadblock. But that's not an actual criminal charge in the state of Georgia. Your defense would be that there's no reasonable articulable suspicion to stop you in the first place. And that's the defense to the charge if you're charged with any additional crimes.
Okay. Also, if I'm stopped by law enforcement and they ask me if I've been drinking, what response should I use on that, George?
Well, my advice to people is if you're stopped and you had something to drink, if the officer asks you, have you had anything to drink, and you admit to it and say, yes, I had a couple of beer, a couple hours ago, and the officer asks you to step out of the car, well, what's going to happen is 9 times out of 10, you're going to be arrested for DUI. My advice to people, whenever they're pulled over and they're stopped and questioned by law enforcement and asked, have you been drinking? I advise clients to respond, officer, it appears that you suspect alcohol in this case. Can I call my attorney? The officer most likely is going to tell you, no, you can't call your attorney. And your next response to that should be, well, officer, if you're going to ask me any questions, shouldn't you read me my Miranda rights? The officer's response 9 times out of 10 is going to be, no, I don't have to read you Miranda rights. My advice then is to follow up with, well, officer, because I believe you suspect alcohol is going to be involved in this case, I'm going to refuse to take any standardized field sobriety testing that you may want to give me. I'm not going to participate, and I know that it is voluntary. And I'm not going to answer any questions that could be used against me in court as evidence. What will happen is once you do that, the officer is going to have to make the call as to whether he's going to arrest you at that time. You need to remember, everything you do, everything you say, every action that you make is going to be used against you in court as evidence. If you refuse to take their field sobriety test, and when I say field sobriety test, not only am I talking about the 3 standard field sobriety tests in Georgia, which is the horizontal gauge nystagmus, the walk and turn, and the one-leg stand, but also the preliminary breath test, which is the handheld alcohol sensor, normally an alcohol sensor on the side of the road. You do not have to take any of those tests. Once you refuse to take these tests, the officer makes a decision whether to arrest you or not based solely on his observations of you without you testifying against yourself. The defense in the case is going to be that he had no probable cause or lacked adequate probable cause to arrest you for DUI in the first place. Now, once you're arrested, and if he decides to arrest you, he's going to read you your implied consent rights. That means that in Georgia, you have basically given any person that drives on the highways of the state your implied consent that you will take a breath test, a blood test, or a urine test if requested to do so. My advice to people, and we're in South Georgia, and I always try to explain it in terms that I would understand because I'm from South Georgia. I tell people that unless you think that when you blow in the Intoxilizer 5000 that it is going to catch fire because you've had so much to drink, it's best to go ahead and take the state's test. What we'll do is your defense will be the lack of probable cause to arrest you in the first place. It will not matter what you blew on the Intoxilizer 5000 because we'll never get to that point. The officer shouldn't have arrested you, therefore you shouldn't be here and worried about this DUI in the first place.
Okay, George, I've got another question, one that I know that it's important, and I try to tell my clients that come in for insurance when they've, run into problems, what about their attitude when they're dealing with an officer? Now, I've always told them, that be professional, be courteous. A lot of times people are upset and let their emotions get away, but how big of an issue is that when you're defending somebody that they've had a professional attitude when they've dealt with a law enforcement officer?
Very important. Quite frankly, recently I had a case where probably if the driver would have been calm and reacted in a calm and clear way, we would have probably been more successful in the defense. You shouldn't use abusive language. You shouldn't use derogatory language. You should act professional, as you suggested. Always be courteous. Always ask questions of the officer in a courteous manner. Screaming, yelling, tearing up tickets doesn't do any good. When you're on the side of the road, quite frankly, you're at the mercy of that officer. And being professional, being courteous is always to your advantage.
Right. I kind of make a light of that. I've always told people, treat them like they're your mom and daddy. Yes, sir. No, ma'am.
If you wouldn't want your mom and daddy to watch that video, you've done something wrong.
Right. Okay, that's all the questions I've got today, George. I sure do appreciate your time. And you can reach George McCranie at his law firm here in Douglas, Georgia if you have any more questions.
For any questions concerning a DUI charge, you can contact me at 912-384-2889 for a free case evaluation, or visit my website at www.mccranielawfirm.com to complete the free case evaluation form. On the website, you will find free reports, my latest blog, and videos. You can also request a free PDF copy of the first chapter of my upcoming book, Down and Dirty DUI Defense.